Hello, hello everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the full moon in Cancer taking place on January 13th, 2025. This full moon in Cancer takes place at 23 degrees and 59 minutes of Cancer and Capricorn. So let's look at this full moon because this full moon to me feels like it's going to shake up a lot of things, that it's really going to remind us what you thought was stable isn't, right? And so if you recall from last week's weekly forecast, a lot of the things that I talked about were kind of feeling disoriented at the beginning of the week because the way that we're stepping into 2025 is vastly different um, than we have stepped into any other new year, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact, as I've said before, that the Capricorn energy that we are experiencing right now is transformed, has been transformed by Pluto in Capricorn that is no longer there. Okay. So, what does a moon in Cancer mean? A moon in Cancer represents the sense of unconditional love, the sense of unconditional safety in our homes, in ourselves, with people, with family. It is the archetype of the mother, and in its highest expression, it is whoever or whatever space you consider a mother, a home. This is where I feel safe. This is my sanctuary. This is where I can be the happiest and the most sad. This is where I can be the most joyful and the most angry. This is the safe space where I can be myself boundlessly and unconditionally at any given moment. So when we think about the energy of a moon in Cancer, this is about us trying to figure out what that sense of unconditional love, home, space, people, right? What is that? And how are we rebuilding it now at this moment in our lives? Okay. And so, as anytime we have a full moon, it is because the moon and the sun are creating an opposition to one another. And so the moon is saying, this is what I want to feel, or this is what's coming up for me to look at in terms of, again, that unconditional love, mother, family, emotional safety, right? And what is the moon doing? Is that it's having a conversation. It's being confronted, if you will. It's looking at the sun. They're looking at each other eye to eye. And the sun in Capricorn generally, right, tends to represent. These are the things that give me a sense of foundation. These are the things that ground me in my life. Why? Because Capricorn represents all of the things that, according to the status quo, give us a sense of safety, a sense of grounding, a sense of responsibility, a sense of identity in the world. Capricorn also represents that in the world that we live in, this is how I've done a good job, right? And so when we tie in all of those themes together, following the status quo, and this is how I've done a good job, because Capricorn has so much to do with how we're perceived by society. This can look like, well, this is the marriage that I have, this is the house that I have, this is the degree that I have, this is the career that I have. This all of the things that societally we have been told give us a sense of grounding and a sense of place in the world. And as long as we follow that, we are doing a great job, right? And I use those words specifically, a great job, because Capricorn's soul evolution in this lifetime, in a human lifetime, is doing something great. But in all of us, we have to figure out what that great is for us. But we tend to start in, the blueprint that has been given to us by society until we have an awakening, until something shakes us up to say, you know what, that's not it. This is it in accordance to what my soul is, right? And I've been talking about these things for quite some time. So here we have, right? Here we have the sun and the moon, which represent the masculine and the feminine, which represent the mother and the father archetype. It is this energy of balance, of masculine and feminine energy, of feeling protected and being the protector, right? And in this full moon, what it's showing us is what we thought was safe and grounded is not. Okay. Now, these are not new themes. We have been talking about this for quite some time, but here's what I think is interesting. In last week's weekly forecast, the weekly forecast of January 6th through the 12th, I was talking to you about how there was a call to action on your behalf of taking the first couple of steps towards something new, right? And I asked you, or I invited you in that weekly forecast to think about the things that kind of fell apart in December, right? And how you were somewhat rebuilding at this moment in time. Okay, also, in that weekly forecast of January 6th through the 12th, I invited you pay attention to what is unfolding throughout this week, throughout the week of January 6th through the 12th. Pay attention to what happens, the conversations that you're having, the events that take place, because they are all leading up to this full moon in Cancer. So everything that took place between January 6th and the 12th all was leading up to this emotional culmination, to this emotional unfolding and reveal of the full moon in Cancer. And what is that? I think what it's going to show us is we have to remember that the things that used to bring us a sense of certainty and grounding and a sense of I'm doing things right in my life and in the world are not it. This is a reminder of that because it's not that we're not trying to do things differently. And I don't even think that it's not that we are not aware that the same things of the past aren't going to work from here on out. It's just that we are so deeply conditioned that we don't know otherwise. We don't know what we don't know. And the thing is that we are trying to figure out rationally, right? I am not saying that any of this is wrong. I am just saying that this is a very honest human expression of what we're experiencing right now. And it can feel very frustrating because you might be asking yourself, what the F do I do now? Okay. And so this opposition, this full moon, the moon that wants to feel emotionally safe in what it knows, right? In opposition to the sun in Capricorn that has always represented a sense of safety from an old paradigm. And the sun here is saying, that is not what is going to give you a sense of safety, a sense of grounding anymore. Remember, we have transformed. The sun in Capricorn here is reminding the moon in Cancer, which wants to remain the same and in a lower expression out of fear. That sun in Cancer is here to remind that moon, I'm sorry, that sun in Capricorn is here to remind that moon in Cancer, not that way anymore. Okay, and here's why. First off, we have to remember that Mars is retrograde in Cancer, right? And Mars went retrograde back into the sign of Cancer the first week, that first full week of January, from January 6th through the 12th. What happened? Mars represents fire. Mars represents aggression, right? I think that's where really that word came when I was first looking at this chart. It represents aggression, anger, resentment. And because this is retrograde, all of this is pent up energy. None of what reveals itself, or perhaps has revealed itself already between January 6th or the 12th, the week building up and leading up to this full moon in Cancer, none of it is new. But because Cancer energy is so concerned with remaining the same in order to feel safe, and it has a very hard time letting go of what feels like home, right? Whether it's an actual home or people that feel like home or something that it has known for a long time, this Mars retrograde in Cancer is going to reveal how necessary it is to let go of that. And here's why. Because that Mars retrograde in Cancer, not only is it in opposition to the Sun, so this represents perhaps our unwillingness to let go, to release, to acknowledge, right? There's a resistance. A Mars retrograde represents a resistance, almost a stubborn resistance to move forward. And that makes sense, right? Mars is retrograde. So if Mars is retrograde and we are experiencing a resistance, and an unwillingness almost to let go of something that feels like home, that makes sense. And I think that once Mars goes retrograde on February 23rd, we will really come to the realization of, I have no other choice. This has happened, whatever this is, right? But Mars is also creating an opposition, right, to Pluto and Aquarius. Now, they are in opposition because they are only 4 degrees away from an opposition to one another. Whenever any planet, but especially a personal planet like Mars, is in opposition to Pluto, Pluto is always going to win. So, what does that mean? Pluto represents this bigger than life force that can force us to do things that we don't necessarily want to do, right? So Pluto in Aquarius here is going to represent an overpowering something, right? That the Mars retrograde in us, the resistance in us, is not going to have any other choice but to accept that this is happening no matter what. Okay. So this is what it can look like, right? Let's say that you find yourself in a legal battle of some sort. And this isn't just the regular litigation. You're trying to take on like this massive corporation, right? And massive corporations have massive legal teams. They have a ton of money. They are very well resourced and very well prepared. And so the Mars retrograde in us can have a really difficult time, a lot of pent-up anger, a lot of pent-up resentment that says, this isn't fair, but there's kind of there's kind of a feeling of I can't win over this. And that's what Pluto represents. Pluto represents, again, this larger than life force that is more powerful, that is greater than us or than our resistance, where whether we like it or not, we have to understand that something's got to give, and it's most likely going to be us, right? And so, what does this mean to me? Is look, I think that in any astrology literature, whenever Pluto is making a connection to a personal planet, I love this because I actually think that it's some of the advice that rings true over time, is that if you are experiencing a significant Pluto transit in that way, that you don't try to resist what that Pluto transit is showing you, whether it is because it is an entity outside of you that is so much bigger and powerful, or it's something that you're experiencing within that you are resisting to acknowledge or accept or realize. Whatever it is, Pluto energy is going to win. And I think that this is actually going to liberate you. Because again, Mars retrograde in Cancer is trying to figure out what is worth fighting for. What direction am I moving in? So if there is any part of you that still feels like, well, no, maybe I can make this work. Well, no, maybe this is the way. Well, what if I just take a little longer, right? As we tend to do when we find ourselves in a new chapter of our lives, because it's natural, right? It's only natural. Our human minds can only fathom so much, right? So the Mars retrograde in Cancer is, again, the unwillingness, the not knowing how to move forward, right? But the opposition to Pluto in Aquarius, which represents when you face your greatest fears, Pluto, you become empowered because you transcend them, right? Pluto in Aquarius represents a new era. So notice how the moon and Cancer are conjunct. They're right next to each other, right? Cancer, the sign that finds comfort in the familiar, right? Because the familiar feels like home, in opposition to that Pluto in Aquarius, which represents a new era, a new chapter, a new paradigm. And anytime Aquarius is involved in anything, it promises liberation. Now, do we acknowledge the liberation immediately? I think that is dependent on everyone's level of consciousness in whatever they may be experiencing at the time. But it is one of those things where down the line you realize this 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that's when this transformation started. So whatever it is that we are all experiencing excuse me, January, we will look back and say, this is when that started. This is when I decided that, right? Okay. Another important element of this chart is the fact that the sun in Capricorn is creating a trine to Uranus retrograde in Taurus. The sun trine Uranus is you will be liberated from something, right, that has felt stable, both because both Taurus and Capricorn are earth signs. You will be liberated from something that has felt tried and true, from something you thought you could count on, right? This is especially true, I think, if it has to do with career, money, right? Because we're talking about money, we're talking about resources with Taurus energy, we're talking about career with Capricorn energy, like work, job, something that feels stable. Both Capricorn and Taurus in the zodiac are signs that we rely on for a sense of stability, right? But I think that the planet that really just overpowers everything here is Pluto in Aquarius. This is especially true because anytime that Pluto switches signs, okay, I really invite you, especially for those astrology buffs out there, astrology students, practicing astrologers, do the research, or if you're old enough to remember, take note to the first year or two of Pluto moving into a new sign and pay attention to the world events that take place and even think back to your own life and the things that took place at the beginning of Pluto in a new sign. Okay, I really invite you to think about that because without a doubt, it's almost like Pluto in a new sign has to say, I'm here and this is what I'm about from this point on, right? It almost has to completely eradicate the idea of that previous chapter, of that previous paradigm, which in this case is Pluto and Capricorn, and say, that's not going to work. And I know that you want it to work, but I'm going to show you that it's not. And so that is the element there of again, it can feel aggressive to us. It can feel as a bit of an attack to us. Um, but depending on our level of consciousness, and if we can remember that nothing is ever by accident and everything is always on purpose for a purpose and working out for us, we can really walk through not just this month, but through 2025 with a lot of faith. And I'll get into that particular word in a second. But let's go back to the trine between the sun and Uranus, right? And look, this wherever the earth signs are involved, there just has to be this very matter of fact level of acceptance. And so whatever happened between the week of January 6th and the 12th, and whatever continues to unfold the week following this full moon, it is what it is. It is what it is. That's what the earth signs represent in the zodiac. Because the earth signs in the zodiac represent the materialization, represent the physical manifestation of something that our human minds need to see in order for us to understand what's going on, right? And so the good thing about that is that Mercury is also in Capricorn, and there is an invitation to it is what it is. You have to accept this, right? And so not only is the sun creating a trine to Uranus retrograde in Taurus, but it's also creating a trine to the south node, newly entered in Virgo. So between the sun, Uranus, and the south node, we have a grand earth trine. I really love this because the south node in Virgo represents that which you thought was organized in your life, that which you thought you was accounted for in your life, that which you had so perfectly created and concocted and manifested in your life, the South Node is saying that's going to change because that is giving you a false sense of certainty. And the grand Earth trine between, again, the Sun in Cap, Uranus retrograde in Taurus, and the South Node in Virgo is saying when you can accept this, you will find a different level of certainty. You will find a different level of groundedness. And look, wherever the South Node is involved, we are talking about soul lessons. And wherever the South Node is involved, we are talking about a remembering. And to me, this feels like a remembering of the only home, the only sense of groundedness that I can really count on is the one of my soul, the one that exists within myself. The South Node, yes, will clear out a lot of things, will purge out a lot of things. And I think, again, because these are earth signs that are connected, we will see the things that are being purged from our lives quite literally and quite physically. But the South Node is about remembering when these material things are removed, what do you come back to? What sense, again, of certainty and groundedness do you come back to within? And the connection to Uranus and Taurus is the reminder of when you remember that you are your own home, right? Wherever you go, you are your own home. This is a full moon in Cancer after all. You will be liberated from the attachment of anything or anyone outside of you. So this full moon in Cancer, I think it's going to come with a lot. And I think it's going to reveal and manifest itself very physically, very tangibly because of that grand earth trine in our physical reality. And again, that Pluto energy is going to feel like we have no other choice but to whatever circumstances we're in, and we're going to have to deal with them. But at the end of the day, they are reminding us here, you cannot do things in the same way. And I know that I've been harping on that theme, on that message for months. But you have to understand that in the greater scheme of things, we are experiencing an elevation of consciousness in which, if we hold on to the things that feel familiar in any way, shape, or form, whether it's things, tangible things, or a career, a title, the identification with a career or a title, certain relationships or certain relationship dynamics, we are not growing. And a collective elevation of consciousness requires that we all grow in that elevation of consciousness because something much greater is happening here. And Pluto in Aquarius is going to be that constant reminder you are all connected. You are all one big, large community. What one does in one part of the world affects the other. And so, in order for us to stop thinking of ourselves as so individualistic, right? We have to get clear on what actually matters to us as individuals, because when we focus on those things, then interestingly enough, we actually create a greater bandwidth to think about others. But if we are caught up in, again, in the identification of a certain title, of a certain career, If we are caught up in the things, the blueprint that we have been given over the years, if we are caught up in drama and chaos of certain interactions, right? The negative, perhaps even vampire-like energy of certain relationships, we will never have the space within ourselves to get in touch with the light that exists within, which is really what the universe is asking of us right now. 2025, when if you're watching me, I'm certain that you watch other astrology channels. It is not just about the planets changing signs. It is about what that means to us, what the calling is to us as individuals, as a collective, as that happens. And if we are alive at this moment in time to experience that, then there is a reason and there is a purpose for us being here, right? So, I earlier I mentioned that I was going to get back to this notion of faith. Okay. So the nodes have now switched signs. They have left the signs of Aries and Libra, which taught us a lot, which taught us a lot about the courage of being ourselves, the courage of understanding our sovereign selves. The South Node highlighted a ton between July 2023 and January 2025. Any codependent dynamics in our relationships, a lot of relationships ended and shifted pretty permanently. Um, and so again, that chaos and that drama that I mentioned a few moments ago, that was the point. That was the point. It wasn't for us to just be hyper independent, but it was for us to recognize when I am consumed by these dynamics, how focused am I in the things that I actually want to do in this life, right? Or if am I waiting on someone? Am I waiting for someone to do something so that I can do it? Am I thinking of myself as so small that I feel that I don't have a light of my own to shine, right? A lot of those themes unfolded for a lot of people in the last 18 months. And so now we've entered a new 18, 19-month cycle that began depending on, whether you use the true node or me node, but the point of the matter is that it begins January 2025 and moves through July 2026, where the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo are going to teach us different lessons, right? So I explained a few moments ago with the Grand Earth Trine a little bit of what that South Node in Virgo means. And I will have something in the eclipse guide where I'm going to do a deep dive into the nodes. And it's really exciting because these nodes are going to transform us spiritually. I genuinely believe that. And so at the time of this full moon in Cancer, that moon in Cancer is creating a trine to that North Node in Pisces, newly entered in Pisces, and that North Node in Pisces is creating a conjunction to Neptune in Pisces. And therefore, that moon in Cancer is also creating a trine to that Neptune in Pisces. We essentially have a stellium in Pisces, okay? And I'll get into Saturn and Venus in a second. But just the fact that we have the North Node in Pisces conjunct Neptune in Pisces, right? Trine the moon, trine that Mars retrograde in Cancer. This is a very emotional full moon. This is a very emotional full moon because what Neptune represents is the ending of a chapter, is the ending of a cycle. And the North Node in Pisces is inviting you, can you have faith that just because you can only see what you're losing doesn't mean that there's nothing to gain on the other side? Can you have faith that there is something much greater to gain on the other side of whatever is ending, of whatever you're losing, of whatever you're resisting letting go of? The North Node in Pisces between now and July of 2026 is going to bring us the opportunity to strengthen our faith, to strengthen our faith in something greater, to strengthen our faith in the universe, source, light, God, whatever you want to call it, the light that exists within you. And It is so that you can remember the light that exists within you. But anything involving Neptune and Pisces means that there is a dissolving of, a dissolution of, a letting go of, an ending of. We're talking about the North Node in Pisces at the very last sign, excuse me, at the very last degree of not just Pisces, but of the zodiac in general. Don't forget, we're going to have a Venus retrograde that is going to go over that 29th degree of Pisces. I'm also going to have a Venus retrograde guide that's going to come out at the same time as that eclipse guide. And so you'll have both of those guides to guide you through the March and April periods of time. Okay. And those guides are coming in February. So just keep that in mind. So, this full moon in Cancer, where we might feel that something is aggressively taken away, or something is aggressively ending, or something feels like overwhelming, right? Or if we want to use water terms, something might feel like we're flooded with emotion, right? And the trine to the North Node in Pisces is saying this is an ending. And so the processing of that ending, the processing of that letting go might take, I think, through eclipse season. Because again, 2025 is a year that to our human mind is so big to fathom because this isn't a year for our ego. This is a year for our soul's growth, expansion, and elevation of consciousness, right? So we live in this very 3D material world, and I think we're being called to lead our lives much more from a 5D reality, which is all about trusting the inner light within, trusting our intuition, trusting our, abilities of whether it's clairvoyance, clairaudience, psychic abilities, which we all have. But because of the very 3D materialistic world that we've lived in, that for so long we have forgotten. Okay. And don't forget that our souls signed up to have an experience in this lifetime, and we also signed up to have amnesia and forget. I'm sure that one day I will remember and understand why I chose to come into this lifetime and experience the things that I've experienced and have amnesia of who I truly am at my core. But that is what we signed up for. And I think that 2025 is going to be a year that is really going to, in some way, shape, or form, force us into, at the very least, becoming very curious about remembering. And I think a lot of it is going to have to do with that North Node in Pisces of the absolute surrender of my will for things to be a certain way when life is clearly telling me that they are not going to be that way anymore. And the South Node in Virgo represents so much this need to control, this need to know what's next, this need to have it all organized, this need to know what my routine is. And the South Node there is saying we're going to purge the need for that. And the soul evolution comes through the North Node in Pisces, which is because right now what's needed is for your faith to grow. Not just faith in something greater than you, which is something that I think is going to manifest itself, but also faith in yourself and the connection to that intuitive guidance that you have within, right? Look, I wouldn't be surprised if anything having to do with the North Node and as it nears an exact conjunction to Neptune and Pisces, or at a collective level, we're talking about that's a ton of water. So this can feel, at the moment of the full moon, it can feel like very emotional, very emotional. Like I am flooded with emotion. I cannot control my emotions. And if that's how you're experiencing this, I really invite you to allow yourself to be there because that's a cleansing. Tears are a cleansing of the soul, right? Tears are the expression of the soul finally releasing and relieving itself from a lot of heaviness that it's been carrying for a long time. Now, I'm not a mundane astrologer, but I think it's safe to say that a North Node conjunction to Neptune, which are energies that are so beyond us, so beyond our control, can manifest in actual like flooding or if we're talking about Neptune, we're talking about, the god of the sea. This feels like tsunami type energy, right? So whether I, I'm not here predicting, I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen over the next week or so. I'm just saying, I think that Mother Earth is going to speak a lot because if we are experiencing an elevation of consciousness, and we have a grand Earth trine at the time of this full moon in Cancer, the Earth speaks. The Earth speaks. And this is the first full moon of 2025. I'm not saying that it's setting the tone, but I'm saying we need to pay attention to the messages that we are very clearly receiving with this full moon because we actually get to set the tone as to how we meet the rest of the year. Okay. Now, here we also have Saturn in Pisces conjunct Venus in Pisces. Now, on the one hand, I think Venus in Pisces is a really beautiful, lovely placement, and I think that this brings for a lot of compassion, a lot of understanding, a lot of almost like a lot of understanding of someone else's pain, right? Because Venus is the planet of relationships, and in Pisces is the remembering we really are one, we really are connected. I feel you, right? So if this has anything to do with relationships, I don't know that this is necessarily an aspect of repair. Because if something's not meant to be, this full moon is going to show you how and why. But I think that the full moon in Pisces there can be this willingness to surrender and to understand we're just on different journeys, right? We're just, I don't have, this doesn't have to end badly, right? Now, the conjunction to Saturn is what can give you that level of maturity to be able to look at a situation that way. Now, on the flip side, a Venus-Saturn conjunction can find you, you know, um, not knowing how to ask for help or feeling helpless in some way. If we're talking about money, this can really highlight your situation with money and perhaps make you question like, where is my money going to come from, kind of thing. Because Saturn represents restriction. Venus is the planet of money, right? Venus is the uh, planet of resource, right? And so we can come across something that says, okay, if I go in this direction, or if this is what manifests with this full moon, I feel restricted in some way. Look, we are always at every given moment in time exactly where we are meant to be in order for us to have a soul lesson, in order for our soul to grow. And so this stellium in Pisces, and I do include the North Node in this stellium. I mean, it's almost impossible not to. Um, this is the understanding. There's something ending and it feels bigger than me. But how do I remember who I am? The evolutionary process of Pisces energy is how do I not get swept up by the experience I'm having and remember myself and who I really am as this something ends in my life, as this chapter ends in my life, right? Because that's what we're talking about here. Full moons represent an ending of a chapter. Pluto is involved. There is a process of a death and a rebirth, right? Mars is retrograde. We really don't have a recourse or a course of action. We have no direction right now, right? Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. There is a lot of surrender that needs to take place at this moment in time. And remember, I've said this before, surrender is a practice, and we have to practice it on a daily basis. And sometimes, depending on the day, we have to practice it multiple times a day. This is the remembering of, oh, life is showing me how little control I have right now. I think that another important aspect and component of all of this is the fact that this full moon, right? And and including Mars there, this full moon is creating a T square. It's a pretty wide T square, but it's still a T square to Chiron in Aries. Chiron in Aries, remember, is the wound of being the self. That's how I've been describing it over the last couple of months. But if this is an ending, and we have a stellium in Pisces, which really represents the ending of a chapter, the ending of a cycle, this is the wound that comes with starting again, the wound that comes with starting all over, the pain, Chiron, right, of a new chapter, Aries. But what I love about this is that we're ready. We're ready to start again. We're ready to start all over. We're ready to choose ourselves. We're ready to show up for our lives in a much more authentic way, right? Because that's what 2024 showed us. The whole point of 2024 was for you to get clear on who you are. So, whatever this full moon shows you that no longer belongs in your life in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a belief system, whether it's you identifying with something else or something from the past, or something very physical because of that grand earth trine. This T square, this aspect of tension, by the way, to Chiron and Aries is this hurts. This hurts. Anything connected to Chiron is going to involve some pain. And yet, and yet, the North Node in Aries throughout 2024 reminded you of who you truly are. And that's what this T square, right, to Chiron and Aries is all about. Who did you figure out that you truly were? And how from that space do you start again? Do you navigate this ending into a new beginning? Okay. Now, look, I think that this full moon in Cancer, because of the aspects, I think it's going to take some time to process. I think that we are going to process it, especially because of Venus being in Pisces right now, and Venus is going to retrograde in Pisces and do its whole dance between Aries and Pisces. I think that it's going to take some time to process, to fully accept. Do I think that we are going to find a way to maneuver around it? No, because Pluto's involved. We cannot outsmart, outdo, outplan any lesson that comes with a Pluto transit, right? And so to me, this just feels like, oh, this is really the new beginning. This is really what I needed, because I think there's an element of us understanding how much what's happening or what has manifested we needed or we need in order to get the point, in case we haven't. Okay? That ground earth trine really makes me think that we're going to see something um, manifest itself very physically in our lives that's going to make things clear, like, oh, this is the reset, because that's also another thing that you want to remember. Look, uh between December 31st and January 10th, the nodes were at 0 degrees North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, right? And if you follow me on Instagram, I posted a story on December 31st that said that, where I said, pay attention to what manifests, to what unfolds, to the synchronicities, to the dreams that you have, to the connections that you make between December 31st and January 10th, because the nodes, especially the North Node being at 0 degrees Aries, represents a collective reset. The things that are happening are faded. Right? And then we have this lead up to that full moon in Cancer, with now the nodes being in Pisces, Virgo. Now we process emotionally. Now we process emotionally the understanding of how much is out of our control and how much that is actually liberating us and how much that is actually taking a weight off of our life in order for us to focus and to go within. Because I've said this before and I'll say it again. Pluto in Aquarius, yes, represents technology. It represents robots and AI, and it represents all of those things. But Pluto in Aquarius is also the technology of our deep psyche. Pluto represents our deep psyche. Aquarius represents a new way of thinking, but not, this isn't just a shift in mindset. This isn't just going from thinking negative thoughts to thinking positive thoughts. This isn't just about manifesting through thought and rituals and journaling. No. We're talking about, again, really getting in touch collectively with our psychic abilities. And what happens if collectively we're being invited to connect with our psychic abilities? Then we open a different realm in a different energy that then opens itself up for telepathy, right? This may sound weird, but we have to think outside the box. And these aren't, I'm not necessarily talking about anything new. This isn't anything we haven't read or we haven't heard. We are talking about languages of the soul. We are talking about seeing ourselves differently, right? The concept that we have of ourselves, how we see ourselves, what we think of ourselves, that being so transformed that we get to the understanding of the light that we really are, and what happens when we understand that. How do we then manifest at a different level? How do we then connect at a different level, right? Again, I think that this may not make full sense now, and maybe some of you are watching and you're like, she's lost it, but it'll make sense. I believe in that for sure. Okay. Um, One more thing that I'll mention is the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, right? Saturn at 15 degrees Pisces, Venus at 11 degrees Pisces is creating a square to Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. I think Jupiter in retrograde in Gemini right now is like us trying to rationally explain what is happening. And the square to Saturn is saying no. Or the manifestation of whatever comes with this full moon being so big or so out of our control that we just can't wrap our minds around it. Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. Jupiter in Gemini is about, well, maybe it's this, or maybe it's that, or maybe this is an explanation for it, or maybe this is what happened, or right? And the square to Saturn in Pisces is kind of like we're met with a mental block because we just can't put our finger on it. We can't figure it out. We can't understand why this is happening. And Saturn in Pisces is the invitation to say, when you stop thinking and you actually go within, you will understand exactly why this is happening. And you will stop trying to rationalize, to pathologize your way through life, but you have to go within because this is the invitation, because that's where the understanding actually lies. This is a powerful full moon. I think that before recording this video, I hadn't really studied it or paid attention to it too much. And then when I really started preparing to record this video, I thought, holy, okay, this is interesting. And that's when I got the word, this is aggressive. Um, not to say that Cancer energy can't be aggressive, but this is different. So I will be very curious to see what manifests with this full moon and how we allow ourselves to surrender to whatever manifests and unfolds and really lean into the soul lesson because there's a lot happening in Cancer that we will continue again to process over the next couple of months and really through the year because in June, Jupiter will move into Cancer. But I think that by the time we get there, we will have a greater understanding. Uh, Lots happening in Pisces over the next couple of months, right? Especially during eclipse season, during that March, April time. So interesting stuff here. As always, may this be of service. Thank you so much for your subscribes, your shares, your comments. Always, always appreciated. I will talk to you next week. Take care.